Okay, so um, the Great Depression and the New Deal. Let me adjust this here. All right. These were some of the things that we were looking at just really briefly, these kind of advancements in physics and the age of the universe and the Big Bang Theory, all of these things that are related to Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, right? And how time space works. These are really big issues for people in 1924, 25 to try to grapple with, right? And so if conservative America is having a hard time with evolution, um, the they're really going to have a hard time with the Big Bang Theory and kind of like a much older age of the Earth than kind of like a pre-modern human would think about things. So that's just one more of those kind of like, whoa, things are changing quickly here. These are some of the things we were looking at in terms of like the evolution of culture in the 20s and the contradictory nature of its values, conservative but not really conservative. Um, I just briefly mentioned that movies were, incredibly popular during this time. And they're silent up until 1927, 28. It's the golden age of like silent film. And so there's organists and theaters and stuff, and it's a hugely influential new medium alongside of radio. Uh, this is an increasingly pop culture now. Like this is like common culture has a lot more media in it, just in general. Um, we had looked at like the rise of Mussolini and Hitler and some of these more conservative forces. Uh, this is also going to go around on in like Iran and Japan. Japan has been growingly, increasingly autocratic as uh, really since the like since since the mid 19th century, since the Meiji Restoration and kind of like the modernizing of Japan, they've been it's just been increasingly more and more militant. And Japan's got a like militant history. Germany has a more militant history than a lot of other countries. So like these countries are ones that are like more prone for these types of things to happen. There's a whole series of earthquakes in Japan in the 20s that like level a lot of Japan. There's a lot of chaos, kind of the way there is um, in Germany in the 20s. Portugal, Spain, Nicaragua. There's all kinds of like conservative movements. Um, Route 66 opens, connecting LA to Chicago. Uh, but there's a housing bubble. Um, the particularly in Florida, where there's often a housing bubble, in California, where there's often a like kind of some of the most extreme parts of the housing bubble. And in Florida, it was often people were selling
A
land.
housing hot air balloon.
Yeah, totally. They were buying land on speculation, meaning they were like, when people buy stock on margin, it means they're buying it at like a 10% cost of the stock, needing to pay the remaining 100% cost of the stock at a certain date in the future. And so people began to do that in the 20s because stocks just kept rising and rising and rising. One of the reasons is the stock, Wall Street endorsed all of those propaganda advertisers from World War One that got discharged from the military or from the government to convince people to do it. So by the end of the 20s, it's like 100 and well, it's maybe like 15% of the nation owns stocks, which is pretty high. I mean, that's higher than it. I think it probably. really is today, in terms of what they owned. But a lot of people had just kept buying it and like selling it because things just kept rising for the most part, kind of like what's happening right now. Um, and that's what happens with housing. So like when there's a shortage of supply in housing and there's a demand, like the housing price goes up and up and up. And if the way, like if there's no regulation to it and people are allowed to just kind of like buy and leverage and sell and leverage and buy and like it creates false prices for things. And for corporations in the 20s, some of them were exploding, like RCA, right, making the radio products, and like, some of them were totally blowing up, but a lot of them were junk, junk corporations that weren't really worth a lot, but were reporting inflated earnings, and then people just wound up hopping on, overvaluing the stock for what it was, creating a bubble that isn't really like based in the actual value of anything. And so in places like Florida, people that were doing land speculation and buying on the margin or buying on credit, they bought real estate because a lot of places, especially like Miami, were just mushrooming in the 20s. But there was no Google Maps. There was no, Zillow. There was no, you didn't even have like picture maps of anything. So you don't know that the like beachfront property you're buying to hold on to and just sell it like a later date and time for more money because it's always going up because Florida's really like lots of people are moving there. You don't know that that beachfront property is actually in the Everglades and you can't build anything on it. It's filled with like alligators, it's just swampland. You might buy it and sell it without knowing that and make a profit. The next person might do that too. But eventually somebody's going to drive down to see their beachfront property and they're going to go, uh-oh, and hence burst the bubble. And that's kind of what starts happening when loans are called in, in 2008. Well, in 2006 really is when that all starts, and like that thing starts to fall apart really quickly. And all those companies that were worth so much are all of a sudden not worth very much at all, and they close down. And a lot of them that are speculation in these new industries don't make it through the depression. And the big corporations, they survive it, and they get more government assistance, and they can kind of swallow up the failed competition in that. So it's not that everybody gets poor during the Depression, but certainly people that had a lot of things leveraged, not people that were just necessarily independently wealthy and owned things. It's more the people that were like trying to take risks in gaining wealth, or, a risky new business, or, just trying to play a real estate game and get a bigger house and, do something like that. Those are the ones that get really like hurt by the bubbles, the housing bubble, the stock market bubble. And we put some things in place that slow this down, and then we make home ownership a lot more accessible right after World War II in the 50s with the GI Bill. But then we take a lot of that stuff away and then put other incentives to make this even more volatile than it used to be. And we put things in place like the Glass-Steagall Act Franklin Roosevelt's going to do that to bar commercial banks from playing the stock market with like home loans and savings accounts, but we repeal that. That's all neoconservatism in like the 80s and 90s. And that's what makes the stock market, crash quite often, actually. So both of those are going to continue to be very volatile things until they're regulated again. The housing market will crash, and it will be worse in California than it is in most places. It always is. It's inevitable. It's just a matter of when. You can't have a perpetually growing market. Not when it's like escalated in such high inflation and high overvaluing of property, right? Like a 3-bedroom house in East Palmdale probably shouldn't cost $350,000. That's crazy. Right? That's insane. Like, we don't even have to talk about Los Angeles. That's just a really, like, that's an untenable position to have. Like I said earlier, it's like that doesn't work very long in the long term. And it's the same thing for stocks and stock markets and insider trading and all that, like those shenanigans that go on until we actually stop.
What if it's on 60th East? I'm just playing.
Well, then it is worth more, right? It is, and it's like, well, that might be part of the problem right there too.
Yeah, it is built up over there, but it's not. We were looking before COVID, right around it, and they were going for that, and I was like, that. I said the same thing. I was like, that's insane. Not in freaking East Palmdale. I don't give a crap where. You're way away from the freeway. It's like, freak, no way. And then soon as COVID hit, I mean, they dropped like $100,000 those new homes. Yeah, I was like, "Ooh, I'm so glad we didn't try to make an investment deal."
Yeah,
we would have been freaking assed out. Excuse my language.
Yeah, no. It's bad, and it's like, well, as long as we have things like where property taxes pay for schools, so poor people always have poorer schools than rich people.
Right.
We'll always have these kind of weird imbalanced problems, and definitely poor people are getting the short end of the stick on it.
The schools are failing.
Yeah. I mean, my God, yes.
Paying all that tax money and going to the schools, and they're all like, I'm not sure like what school is not failing in this Antelope Valley.
Yeah.
Besides the private schools.
Well, it doesn't end with like the housing bubble and the housing deregulation. This thing is very interesting, and I think I already updated this part in Satori, but Sloanism is it's kind of how we still operate today, kind of this bottom line, like absolute squeeze every profit possible out of it. So I write a little bit about this and a little bit about corporate welfare, which is a strange phenomenon that conservatives never account for or ever have to answer for, but it's straight up non-capital. It's not capitalism. And it like stifles innovation and actually like produces more of the concentration of wealth, more and more and more of it. So this is like a shift that happens right here, right at kind of the peak of this deregulation. And you can see where like the Dow Jones is at in 1919. It's like 120 points.
Can you share your screen, please?
Oh, I thought I was sharing my screen. What's going on here?
It's all you.
Screen. There?
Thank you.
Oh, man, I thought you guys could see this stuff. Yeah, so this is all in here. Okay, so the Sloan replaces Fordism. But right here, I talk a little bit about corporate welfare and this idea of like, governing through corporations, how the government essentially does that, which is not capitalism. It's not conservative economics either, but somehow it's attached to conservatives or Republicans, the GOP in the past. And so trying to talk a little bit about that and explain just some concepts about how, too big to fail works and how some of these things in our economy function. And I was showing the kind of Dow Jones Industrial Averages is like 120 points at the end of the war, but then it gets cut in half because there's like a sharp depression trying to adjust to the post-war economy. By the end of the 20s, it is up like to 400 points almost. And then within several years, it's down to like the lowest ever, like lower than 10 years before, a third of what it was 15 years earlier. That's a lot. The gross national product gets basically cut in half, like what the country produces. It's crazy. It's like a crazy fallout, but that's all because of like deregulation. It's what they call unfettered capitalism. It's just like, okay, well, we'll let all of this kind of run free, but then secretly behind the door, it's we're we're bailing out certain people's companies, and usually they're some of the biggest ones, but they're also a lot of times some of the ones that politicians have financial connections to. That happens all the time. That's what Grant got in trouble for. Not him specifically, but his cabinet. It's some of the stuff Warren G. Harding got in trouble for. It's certainly something that lots of politicians over time get in trouble for. They make laws and give themselves contracts for companies they own and have interests in. A lot of times they're kind of hide it, or it's veiled or through several different corporations. But like we saw yesterday, the New York Times published out of Trump's taxes. He has a bank account in China. He's paid hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax out of it, and he had it in a corporate name instead of his own. But it's his, and he takes the things for it. So, and this is something on dismantling public streetcar systems in L.A. In favor of trying to just promote driving more, which is why Los Angeles has just the worst public transportation.
It has what?
Just some of the worst public transportation in the world.
Oh
Los
yeah,
Angeles,
for
yeah.
sure. My aunt lives like on an old like an older street from like the 1918s.
Mm.
And they've totally like made it all like way more money to like what it's actually worth, but whatever. But those streets, literally, we can't even get two cars going down the same way because they're originally intended for horses.
Oh yeah, yeah. This film right here, I usually
Oh,
show a clip of it in class. I'll show just a sec here. It's public domain now, so I think I'm safe to show it on here. Um, it's a great silent movie. It's it, and usually when I tell classes that, they're like, "Oh my god, I hate clowns." I'm like, "No, that's a different one. That comes later." Clara Bow she's a famous actress in the 20s. She's known as the It Girl, and it essentially is sex appeal. It's like sexiness, or the idea of sexiness. It's like this
right.
is a new idea in culture, and we don't really realize that. It's like this is radical, and even the setting of this stuff. Well, the fruit, you've got it. He's trying to examine, like, he read it in a magazine. So it's like, well, there's
Like It
magazines.
Girl.
Yeah, the It Girl. And so it's like set in a department store. She's a single girl in the city. It's like, this is all very different than like Gone with the Wind, right? Like this, those are like crazy different worlds, even though there's people alive right now that were alive during, when Gone with the Wind was set. Like there's Civil War vets still alive at this time. It's actually enjoyable. I don't know how many of you guys have ever actually watched a silent movie, but they're worth watching. This is a good one. Charlie Chaplin movies are good.
You're away from your mic.
Oh man, it's showing loud. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's just like when you sit back sometimes, I like we can't hear.
I
I
think
can't
my
hear.
mic dropped a little bit. It didn't feel that far away from me, but maybe it is. I'll make sure I'm on here. Yeah, I was just saying this movie. It's great. It's worth watching, and the Charlie Chaplin movies they're really enjoyable. They move pretty fast because people don't want to read a super long movie, right? Like they want to read little snippets in between, like these kind of action shots or funny shots or romantic shots. So some movies actually move a lot faster than we usually think they do. We just have to pay a little bit closer attention than we're used to paying in most movies. But it's definitely worth it. And this one's, you can watch it for free on YouTube. So I'd recommend watching it. It's fun. And Disney, this is the time Disney airs, and then this is Jazz Singer, the first silent film. And this, of course,
Is that
is one of those
blackface?
classic tropes slave culture and entertainment and forms of like minstrel storytelling and comedy and song, um, appropriating it and then even taking black people out of it. And even when they have black people in vaudeville like this, they would have them in blackface with like the gloves and stuff on. Like you can't even be really like you have to wear a costume even in that. So this is like, this is why people are like, dude, what the, don't wear blackface. That's not okay anymore.
No, it's not. It's completely.
I mean, it was never okay. It was not okay before. It's
Never
just not
okay.
okay. It's
Yeah.
like, no, we know this is super messed up, and there's a really long history of it in Hollywood. And the first, the first talking movie, real, mainstream one, is Jazz Singer with
Excuse me.
Al
I have a
Johnson.
question for Michelle.
What's that?
Huh?
I have a question for you.
Is
Oh,
it?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the blackface, why is it so offensive? Because I can really understand why.
Oh, you're going out.
Yeah, your connection's a little it's unstable. I think I got like you're asking why is it so offensive?
Yes.
Okay, so like
Okay.
I mean,
Oh.
well, you guys want to take a stab at that?
No, go ahead. I mean, did you ask me or
I'll
you
explain
asking?
it.
Yes, you. I
Yeah, go
asked
for
you.
it.
Because I don't know. I don't really understand why it's so offensive.
The reason that it's so offensive is because it's a caricature of African Americans. It's a
Mhm.
caricature of the features that they were pressed for, the overdrawn lips, the unrealistic skin tone of shades, the nose, things that African Americans were um, insulted over, things that features, and especially the skin color that stopped them from getting jobs, that kept them in bondage and slavery. For you to put that on for a 30-minute act to make white people laugh, it's insulting.
Amen, girl. You said it. You couldn't say it more perfect than
Yeah,
I
that
would have
was
did.
really good. That was
That was really good.
great.
Exactly. And then they want to turn around and they want to they're culture stealers. They would turn around and use those same features to get liposuction and get lip injections and they're getting tans. But then you talked about and said that that was wrong. That was ugly. That was dirty. Black is evil. If you look in the dictionary, what black is compared to white. And so, can you hear me,
We're
you
getting a
guys?
lot of feedback. I think
Oh, that's not me.
Edu says that you. I can't tell. Let me see.
Somebody else's camera's on. Whoa.
There we go. I think we're good now.
Okay, there we go.
Just remember, just
So,
said, or anybody else, if you're not talking, just mute when you're not talking.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll start getting an echo.
Yeah. I hear you.
so yeah, those same features that they talked about, they've you know was talked upon negatively with the African Americans. Um, they're turned around and then they use it to make money.
Yeah, this is an image I used to show in my Women in American History class. It's super offensive, so just to, like, be prepared. But they're like they used to sell these. These are like
Mhm.
like drink stir sticks.
Yeah,
Like
even
that's
at
I
the
mean
Charlie
that's
Brown.
like that's a related to blackface and that kind of caricature and that like uh you know
Like that at the Charlie Brown Farms in Little
Yeah.
Rock.
Yeah,
oh
like
yeah,
I get
dude, they
it.
got some
I
stuff
get
out
it.
there.
Because
right,
I get it.
including
Because the reason why I
Oh, sorry, Adusa,
can you
Adus,
hear me?
yeah, Adusua. Your
Yes.
your connection's really unstable, so you're cutting in and out when you talk, and when other people
Um,
talk and you're unmuted, it's feeding back. Oh
oh,
yeah,
okay.
right there. I just heard myself. So maybe
Taking it
maybe
around.
type in the chat. Maybe type a question in the chat, and yeah, there we go. There we go. Unstable internet's the worst. Well, these stir stick things are the worst. They're crazy. Hey, shout out to my favorite movie, Singing in the Rain. I think it's the best.
Oh yeah, my dad likes that
It's such
movie.
a good movie. It's all about this. It's like the changeover from like silent movies to talkie movies. And it's funny and it's a musical and it's I think it's second or third on the AFI top list of films. Like it's so good. Um, it's kind of
What
fun to
about It's
watch
a
because you think
Wonderful
about
Life?
that. What's that?
What about what's It's a Wonderful Life?
I don't like that movie.
Ah!
That's on there
Okay.
though. It's definitely on there. It's definitely on there. It kind of just bums me out, man. I just don't like it. I like other Jimmy Stewart movies. Speaking of like actors, like this is celebrity culture. This is the decade that the idea of celebrity is really
Mhm.
born. And the earliest celebrities, some of them are actors. Like actors are certainly starting to become famous. There's a thing earlier about Rudolph Valentino. As like as an early sex symbol. Clara Bow. There's other ones. Lillian Gish. She's an early one. But a lot of them are like sports figures or cultural figures like Charles Lindbergh. So like Babe Ruth is wildly famous. Baseball in general is so popular, and there's tons of huge stadiums being set and like radio being getting to broadcast professional baseball games around the country made it even more of a kind of nationally unified sport and a nationally unified experience for people. Um, Houdini, he dies here. You can read about that. And Charles Lindbergh, who's like probably the most famous person in the 1920s, like in the 1920s. Maybe not anymore, but he definitely was.
Those
Um,
babies still missing.
his baby was stolen. Like I actually write about that because it's kind of some of the price of fame, the blowback of fame, and like
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't people didn't have to think about privacy like that. This is
Mm-hmm.
like these are the things that change with society that we're like, well, I kind of always took that for granted, but yeah, they're pretty big changes. The world's oil is growing all over the world. Kind of commercial business is growing all over the world. Consumerism's at an all-time high. Wealth inequality is at an all-time high since like maybe the 1880s, like just the kind of like the robber baron era. It's that high now. Um, there's terrorism. There's corruption. There's breakthroughs like the quartz clock. Which makes like
Mm-hmm.
watches, like wristwatches that don't have to be like wound like a pocket watch. It's a weird thing to think about, but like that, there was a time before that, like that wasn't a thing. Just like a lighter, like the Zippo lighter was like, well, that's crazy. Like, huh? We don't need matches. Like, like there's just a time before that. They're the things that we just kind of don't really think about when they come into play. Um, yeah, America continues to be isolationist as the rest of the world grows like increasingly more and more like radical, and a lot of places much more like far conservative right. America's still staying, hands length. Herbert Hoover runs for president in 1928, and he's a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he wins everywhere except the South, which is still very Republican party of. Uh, no. This is they're very Democrat. Not the party of Lincoln, right? They're still very Democrat, and this is monumental because Alfred Smith is the first Al Smith. Sorry, Al Smith. Yeah, probably Alfred Smith. He's the first non-Protestant candidate on a major ticket. He's a Catholic. Um, so this is a big deal, and so he only wins in the South where they like diehard loyally Democratic, and Rhode Island and Massachusetts, which have a ton of Catholic people. He even went in Maryland, which is like the Catholic state. So he really didn't do good at all. And
I hope that would be us on November 3rd, except it'd be opposite.
yeah, exactly. Which it very well might, because note, this changes, right? This becomes
Mm-hmm.
totally conservative Republican. So does, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
a great deal here does, but this flip flops, and that's coming in the 60s.
Wait,
That's
so is
like
the vacuum cleaner named from him or the dam?
the
I
dam is.
forgot.
Yeah, the
The
dam is.
dam
I don't
is.
think it had anything to do with the vacuum cleaner. The dam is named after him. I believe he commissions it, and it's like built right at the end of, after he's out of office. It's finished, I think, under Franklin
Okay.
Roosevelt. But he does a few things when the economy takes a hard turn, but it's not enough. He's a very conservative, like hands off, deregulation, big business Republican. It's more of like the 1920s, and you can see this in his speech right here in 1928. Unemployment, in the sense of distress, is widely disappearing. We in America today are near the final triumph over poverty than ever before. In the history of any land, the poorhouse is vanishing from among us. We have not reached the goal, but given a chance to go forward with the policies of the last 8 years, and we shall soon, with the help of God, be in sight of the day when poverty will be banished from this nation. There is no guarantee against poverty equal to a job for every man. That is the primary purpose of the economic policies we advocate. A job for every man, right? Because poverty is going to disappear and the economy will just keep getting bigger, and all the riches will trickle down to folks.
Wait a
I'll
minute.
say
that
exactly that, but
sounds like
that's what's there.
I've heard that speech.
The
Parts of
poorhouse
it
is vanishing.
now, like, oh, the best economy we've ever seen, from the last administration, and literally that just sounds like we're really repeating history.
Yeah, and he's also the one that says, he promises a car in every garage and a chicken in every pot. Like that's,
Yeah.
but obviously that doesn't happen. So after the crash, he says, well, the crash only took place 6 months ago. I'm convinced we have now passed the worst. With continued unity and effort, we shall rapidly recover.
Wow,
There is one certainty of the future of a people, of the resources, intelligence, and character of the people of the United States. That is prosperity.
That's what they said about COVID.
Right? Right? It's like, well, you can say all you want. There's not really any accountability in politics on either side ever with anybody, really. But certainly not on stuff like this. You don't have to. What if it doesn't happen? Oh, well. What if it does happen? Then, hey, you called it. You're even better, right? You get more power.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, it's like, well, then you become the guy that's like, well, we'll battle through it. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You're just changing your story. It's kind of like the like TV prophets that keep predicting the end of the world. And you're like, I'm pretty sure under biblical laws, like you should be dragged outside the city and stoned to death after the first one doesn't come right. But like, certainly after the 10th one is wrong. Like, there's got to be a line, people, but there's not. There isn't really. So, like, yeah, look at this. This is the climb of the stock market from the beginning of the 1920s to, like, 1929. The population grows by 20%, 20% in 10 years is crazy. Radios go from 500,000 to 10 million. That's like 10% of the households in America have radios. Or not 10%, 10% of the people. Like that would be probably like maybe 40% of the country, 50% of the country has a radio maybe. The country almost doubles in its electrification. Farms with electricity go up significantly, but no, by 1930, it's still 9%. 9% of farms in America have electricity. Vast parts of the country do not have electricity still once the 1930s come. So the 20s, they experience a lot of that stuff in town, but there's a big growing difference between in town life and rural America life. Like really in the 20s, it is really growing and changing. And the average income goes up significantly, but costs of everything are like quadrupling, and so that's not like much of a real gain. And the cars, I mean, like America's driving by the end of the 30s, like everywhere, and especially in places like the Southwest. That's a huge thing. Middleton, the Life in Muncie, Indiana, a study in modern American culture, is this like, it's really like one of the first major sociological study works like this, where they're looking at kind of like an average American town, quote unquote average. So kind of like right in the middle, and the results they get and the conclusions they come to are very interesting. And they did a study later kind of comparing things and following up, and here's some quotes from a Guardian article about this. It's interesting. And then right as the decade's coming to a close, and people say they're on a continually high platform of prosperity, the stock market completely crashes in. Yeah. This economist, he's from Yale. Like, these are like the elite, the like intellectual elite of the day. He says, these are wrong. I have to like adjust this. See, these are some of the things where I'm like editing. But 5 days before the stock of the crash market, this like Yale economist who's super revered says the nation is marching along a permanently high plateau of prosperity.
Sir.
Well, what happened with that? Like, that guy was wrong. Yeah.
I think I can comment on this because I'm sort of like, I'm a business major.
Yeah, you're an econ guy.
Yeah, and so the thing is, what went wrong is how economists considered at that time the pre-Keynesian approach was that the capitalist systems were like informational systems. They didn't conceptualize it like that, but they did consider it to be like a system that could adjust quickly. And so if there was like depression, it would self-regulate, but also like it would just like the things would adjust and it would balance out and everything would be fine. I think corporate structures, like the nature of how there's different views. Obviously, like one viewpoint, the monetarist view, considered that the Federal Reserve was responsible for the depression because the supply of money was too small. The other view is that is sort of relates to corporate structures and how if there's no business optimism, businesses cut wages and they stop investing.
Mm-hmm.
That creates a cycle. It's sort of like a race to the bottom.
That's that Sloanism. Yeah. Sloanism in corporate structure is like exactly that, and it's totally one of the causes of it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to document in my corporate law, how the legal structures, it kind of paves the way for like the modern conceptualization of income inequality. And like Marx in his Das Kapital, for example, worried about overproduction. I need to reread my Marx because I haven't read him for quite a while. But you get it how like many economists were sort of like, I don't say ringing the bells because no one conceptualized it like that, but they did worry that those changing corporate structures would have those types of consequences in the long run.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's ironically, it's one of the things that Franklin Roosevelt will do that gets him in trouble with the courts and even with Congress is some very controversial, highly kind of slightly, fascist almost moves a little bit. They've got like a hint of it, or certainly like kind of high control socialism where they set quotas for things and like, okay, so now you can't produce more than this certain thing if you're in this industry. And sometimes he lets the industries set their own quotas for things. And that's why it's supposed to still be capitalism. But really, all the only people that set those quotas and prices and fix things are like the large corporations at the time. So they almost exclusively are the only ones that really benefit from that. And then the even more controversial things is when, like, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which is going to be one of the first things Franklin Roosevelt gets elected for. Um, he does when he gets elected is try to help out farmers because, like I said, in the 20s, agriculture was already dropping and rural America wasn't progressing very forward. And so poverty in rural America was extra pronounced. And farmers were suffering before the depression, and then it's so bad, and then the like dust bowl. I mean, it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so one of the things that they would do is like for pig ranchers, they'd said, okay, well, the price of pork is too low. You can't even afford to keep pigs alive at what you're making off of that. We need to destroy 5 million pigs. So they kill 5 million pigs. And the price of pork goes up, and pork, ranchers are making a, bearable living at that point. But like, the government killed 5 million pigs? Like, what? Not like bought and distributed and instead of a chicken in every pot, like a pig in every barbecue. Like that's enough to pass around to like most households in America for at least, a few meals. No, just kill them, destroy them. It doesn't like some of it's crazy thinking. And it's
Like government cheese?
yeah. Like, well, you don't like the government cheese is the handout, right? Like this is like, you're not even getting a handout. It's just, you're not getting the government bought pork. They're just burning them.
No, that's a waste.
I know, right? Like there's millions of Americans
Wait, is
standing
this like
around in
before
soup
the
lines.
depression or after the depression?
It's like during it. It's like it's one of his many steps that he takes to get out of the depression. Like, so this is a step to help this kind of sector or these things. But then, the Supreme Court comes in and says, you can't have a National Industrial Recovery Act that sets quotas for things, or like an Agricultural Adjustment Act that like buys and then just like burns off pigs and like that's too much control of the economy. And they like snap those things down. And that's why he wants to pack the courts, actually, is because he doesn't want opposition there, because he did make a lot of things happen.
Oh, wow. The harder your wife works, the cuter she looks. What? Okay.
I've got some stuff in here on propaganda, for sure. Because with the radio
nugget.
and with movies, it's like, well, this is much more effective now. Los Angeles begins with the Hoover Dam because now, not Los Angeles, Las Vegas, because now Vegas can have a good, a water supply that can support a bigger population for gambling in like a resort. That was initially, designed on Route 66 to like cater to GIs that were driving across country to like the bases in California and stuff, and people coming out and moving out here for new jobs. There is a bailout of banks, and it happens, before Franklin Roosevelt's actually inaugurated. It's a Reconstruction Finance Corporation to stimulate the economy through government lending, but it's to like failing corporations and big businesses. It's too big to fail, and it doesn't. It's too little, too late. It's a drop in the bucket to like punctuate things. The bonus marchers. This is just such a sad story. It's World War I veterans who are promised a bonus that would come due in, I think it was like 1945 is when it was due. But they like ask for it early is not even like a handout, just like an advance on their retirement they can't take later, but it won't matter if they die. I'd much rather have the money now. And the government says no, and so they organize and march on the White House. They march on the White House, and it's a standoff. There's a lack of concern for people still. It feels like and this is kind of the conservative standpoint, like private charity takes care of people. It's not the government's place to help out the poor or like fix things like this. And it's not the government's place to like, even fix the economy. Like the economy should balance back out. And under, traditional capitalism, that's true. But under, this kind of crony capitalism like we saw where they're already bailing out banks and like big, corporations and trying to help out the stock market by propping up failing companies. It's like, so how's the economy supposed to restart? Like maybe, like all the people that aren't holding on to the keys to all these important parts of sectors of the economy and the industrial world are going to lose a lot during a depression like that. But the people who have the actually valuable things, they're actually going to profit in the long run, because there is somewhat of a reset, but it's not out of like businesses failing so new ones can start, right? Like every time a tree falls in the forest, there's light for two more to grow up, right? That's the idea in capitalism. But if, failing stuff is being propped up and promoted, that's not going to happen. And so what does happen is, and Noah referenced this, Keynesian economics. John Maynard Keynes is going to be like the kind of probably most formative economist for the 20th century. And he accurately predicted the problems about the Treaty of Versailles early on. And then he becomes a leading economist at this time and is becomes somewhat of an advisor to FDR and really like helps shape that kind of economic policy. And really essentially unpacks truths about a globalizing consumer economy that proved to be very true, at least through the end of the 20th century. I don't think they're true anymore. But as he says, essentially, like in a consumer economy, if there's a depression, the only way out of it is to just pump loads of money into the economy. People start buying again, and there's more jobs in production, and there's more trust in the economy, and people can own homes, and like, wealth gets redistributed a little bit actually in all of that. But if you don't do that, like a consumer economy is not going to like just pull itself out like that. So FDR does all kinds of stuff like creating jobs and New Deal programs and administrations that create lots of jobs, provide for people in all kinds of different ways, like Social Security, but doesn't actually really follow Keynesian economics all the way, because it sounds very extreme. And actually, that's kind of the thing that's true about economics, I think, is like the ones that are kind of extreme are not necessarily right or wrong. It's just that the principles tend to be more like true, like, that's probably accurate. And so World War II proves that to be true, because it's like the economy is recovering. By the end of the 30s, America's doing actually pretty well. Like, we're recovering. We're not in like prosperity mode, though. World War II kicks that way into overdrive, because we go to zero unemployment. America starts intentionally importing Mexican immigrants. It's called the Bracero program. Like, we don't have enough people to work the fields. It's not just Rosie the Riveters. It's Rosie everything. It's women are everywhere. Minorities are finding, better, higher paying jobs than ever before because of it. So overall, it's like, well, that's a really good thing. It's all driven because of war. So that's the terrible reality of it. And after the war, like, it affects our economy so much we never get off wartime economy and therefore have to continue wartime production. So,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
Um, I don't want to sound insensitive, and why was World War II? Why did it hurt our psyche, so to speak? Because I understand, like, if you're drafted into the war, but the thing is, Germany was across the ocean, and even and also, like, I read from Victor Davis Hanson, they didn't have like a sophisticated air fleet that could actually target America across the sea. Like, they didn't have that. They didn't have that fleet built, or they didn't have a navy that could. Like, if the British went to war with America back then yeah, you should be scared because don't get me wrong, it'd be questionable if they could win, but they could like land troops at our ports and stuff like that. The thing is, the Germans could not do that at all.
So you're asking, why did we have
Because you said terrible reality of it. And I understand if you have a son off to war or if you're off to war, but why?
I mean, more the terrible reality that, like, war is what solved the economic problems instead of human ingenuity and cooperation. And then war, because it produces such prosperity, we can't let go of it after the war. So we never convert to a peacetime economy. We're still operating, still today, never stopped a wartime economy. We have a massive standing army and massive, worldwide Navy and Air Force, and we produce the most sophisticated weapons in the world. Like, you can't do that and not have a giant military machine. Before World War II, it seemed possible to live in the world safely without that. And if you were attacked, like, you could industrialize weapons and make stuff quick enough to, like, respond. At least a nation like America could, which turned out to be true. And it's not like we didn't have anything. We had aircraft carriers and stuff by that point, but, like, we didn't have a military the size that we had now after World War I at all. We were rather isolationist. And so I say, yeah, it's unfortunate because it's like, not even that America got involved in the war. I think in many ways that was inevitable. I just mean it's more unfortunate, like, that was what did it instead of other things. Because it doesn't have to be war, even though William Randolph Bourne said, I think it was him who said, war is the health of the state. I had that quote in there. It makes the state more powerful, and it usually produces more wealth for its people, both in, like, terms of the industrial production of it and the spoils of war of it. And it's like, well, that's the reality. That's always been going on, and that's kind of just where we're at. We're not like in some worldwide peacekeeping mission. It's like, well, we're in like a make the world great again mission, right? That's not Trump. That's like America at least since World War II. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. And I also heard that you can divide up FDR's New Deal into two phases. Could you discuss that? Like the first New Deal and the second New Deal?
Yeah. So here you see he's elected president, and he gives this, he begins developing his fireside chats, talking to people directly on the radio. It's one of the reasons he wins and, like, really, like, pulls well with people, is he uses technology the way that the Republicans weren't. Same way Obama got elected in 2008. Like, he hits Twitter, social media. John McCain was not doing that, right? Like, so there's a lot of comparison between the two. They both inherit really bad, like, economic situations. They're not, like, identical at all, but you can see the landslide that Roosevelt won by. And he does this. He has an even higher landslide than this, I think, the next election. Wildly popular. And a lot of it is because of his New Deal. So he got elected. His platform is saying, Americans need a New Deal, not this, like, bad deal that the conservatives gave them. There you see some of those comparisons. And these are some of the world alternatives to the New Deal. You can see, like, what's going on around the world at the time in terms of, like, how different countries are responding to a global depression that really probably Germany started because they were broke from the war and hyperinflation that happens in their country at the time. But America, like, sent that shockwave around the world a few more times and more pronouncedly. And so everybody's dealing with it different ways and dealing with the fallout of the war the different ways. And here comes, Franklin Roosevelt saying a New Deal. And he begins making all these new agencies and acts and administrations to like help try to generate jobs and resources for people, and not just like handout money. Yeah, there's poor aid and poor assistance, but it's like he also did stuff like the Works Progress Administration, which paid for public arts. So artists are out of work, just like they are now. This paid them to like write plays and put on play productions in like small towns all across America, in the South, like places that like people would never ever get to see an actual like artistic play, like that's written or produced or murals painted or folk songs recorded. One of the things that is produced out of that is like somebody went around and audio recorded the like last living slaves, like the last people alive to like remember living through slavery, like went around and recorded tons of slave narratives that way. Like, oh my God, thank God that we funded that. Like, can you imagine not taking advantage of that? Like, what an important thing to do. So it wasn't just like a government handout that way. It was, and in some ways there, that's like a little bit more like capitalistic than just socialistic to some degree. Um, and that's why Franklin Roosevelt's not talked about in terms of a purely socialist uh, person, though by today's standards, I mean, God, he looks like a socialist in a lot of things, uh, and like liberals from the '90s look like wildly conservative today compared to how far right the right is. Um, yeah, anyways, his first 100 days is like this, like, yeah, there's the Public Works Administration, Tennessee Valley Authority building dams to like keep the this area from flooding, the delta from flooding here in it electrifies the South. Basically, it's still in operation. It's a huge thing. It's controversial. It actually destroys a bunch of parts of like the ecosphere over there, like in the environment. This is the one where they're killing the pigs. The CCC, though, this is taking 2.5 million people and putting them to work making like national park trails and public, benches and in, pathways and hiking trails and stuff. It's like, okay, we're putting people to work and it's starting to work. It's pulling America out of it begins pulling America out of the depression. There's a freeze on banks. It's called a banking holiday. There's all kinds of banking reforms put in place. There's a thing called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, which is like made to guarantee banks won't fail by insuring money. But banks have to pay into that now, and it's like a federal thing. That's why like marijuana dispensaries can only take cash because they can't do money transactions with banks that are federally insured by the government, which all the big commercial banks are, because it's illegal federally still, but it's legal in some states. So that's just a weird thing right there. In Germany, right as FDR is becoming elected, inaugurated, um, uh, the Nazi Party wins a plurality of seats in the Reichstag, the like German Congress, basically. And Hitler then, this is his rise. This is rise to power. So it's happening like simultaneously with Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin he's still in charge of the Soviet Union. Will be for a long time. And note, as soon as Hitler gets elected, Dachau is the first concentration camp, and it gets started immediately. And the first people locked up are political prisoners. They're not Jews. They're not anybody else. It's just political prisoners.
Socialists, communists, and anybody he doesn't like.
Yeah, the communists in particular, pastors, that the ones that would speak out, they got locked up right away. And and I think this is probably a place we can freeze on this, and you guys can just kind of dive in a little deeper on the New Deal details on your own. But the first New Deal, they say, it's right when he gets elected. It starts at the 100 days, and it's all these kind of initial programs. And they say the first New Deal is a response to, it's about recovery, right? So like recovering from the Depression. And then when the court comes in, kind of like strikes some of his stuff down, I believe it's 1935. I'll just scroll really quick. I will find out. The Dust Bowl happens, this drought, all kinds of things happen. This is they call alphabet soup. This is all the stuff he did over, the 30s. That's part of the New Deal. The League of Nations falls apart, and then as we move into the next year, that's when the courts kind of strike down a lot of his stuff. He gets reelected and starts a second New Deal, and this time instead of focusing really on recovery, because the nation is now on the path to recovery. It's still the 30s. It's still hard, but it's not 1932 hard. By the time we're up to 1936, it's like we're doing better. Like things are recovering. It's not the end of the world at all. And this time, everything that he's really focusing on is about economic prosperity or protection even. So it begins to shift from like recovery to like how do we recover? How do we stop bleeding? How do we get people fed to okay, how do we develop this more? How do we ensure this will go forward? And so that's when things like Social Security and whatnot come in. This is a plan to make America better long-term into the future. Good plan at the beginning. We'll talk about how that works out when we get into World War II. But that's the trajectory of the 30s. And so, Franklin Roosevelt is the first New Deal and the second New Deal. And then the third is his third and a little bit of a fourth term during World War II, during the 40s. So that's kind of his presidency. 4 terms, technically. He gets elected 4 times, but dies, in the first year of his 4th term. So 13 years as president. And, first New Deal, which is about recovery. Second New Deal, which is about, prosperity. And then the war and fighting the war. And it definitely takes a toll on him. I mean, it just kills him, essentially. But we will get into that. So, just kind of try to wrap your mind around the New Deal and the things that happened because of it, the things that are still with us today. This is really the beginning of modern Democrats. This is, or what was a modern Democrat up until probably 2016. I think we're in a new era all across the board. Different topic for a different time. So get into that and look at what's happening in comparison around the rest of the world, because World War II doesn't start in 1940 or 41 or 42. It starts back, really, really, really far. We've talked about a lot of things like the Russo-Japanese War, even before the Great War that happens. But many people, and I definitely agree with this, talk about the war as this is one thing. There's an armistice that we say is a peace treaty and force something on people, but it really is an armistice. Germany was just waiting for Hitler and somebody to help them rearm and sort out what didn't get sorted out in World War I. It's this was going to happen. We didn't need Hitler for this. This was coming one way or the other. So we'll cover that, but pay attention to the things leading up to it.
Thank you, Professor.